Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webcast entitled Small Caps, the Benefits of Growing Your Market, PR, and Social Media Presence. Today's conversation is brought to you by Castano Communications Consulting and powered by OnStream Media. To submit a question or comment at any time during the webcast, please click on the Ask a Question button located at the bottom of your screen. Simply type your message into the box and click the Submit button. All questions will be answered at the end of today's presentation. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to today's moderator, Wendy Galvin, founder and CEO of Wendy Galvin Agency. Wendy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, Greg. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to Compro.biz. So, Greg, let's start off with you. What is your definition of public relations?
Okay, well, first of all, I think there's a textbook definition that is useful, but I think it needs to be kind of amended a little bit. The textbook definition that I use is from the Public Relations Society of America, the PRSA, which is the official trade group of the PR industry. And they define public relations as a strategic communications process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. Now, on a very broad level, that's true, but to me, public relations, especially for corporate entities and specifically small-cap companies, is that it's mainly about reputation management. In essence, PR is a reputation and image management process in which an organization seeks to shape favorable public opinion about itself via the media, utilizing either in-house or external public relations experts as intermediaries. Taking that definition into consideration, what would you say, Wendy, are the differences between public relations, marketing, and social media?
Okay, thanks, Greg. I'll start with marketing. Marketing is critical to the success of any size company. Marketing defines the product or service's value to the customer. What customers value today can be difficult to pin down. Harvard Business Review defines 30 elements of value that fall under 4 categories: functional, life-changing, emotional, and social impact. Of course, these elements vary according to industry. For example, in financial services, customers value speed, quality, easy access, avoids hassles, and reduces anxiety. In retail, customers value quality, sensory appeal, variety, aesthetics, and therapeutic value. Marketing defines target audiences, how to reach them, competitors, strategic messaging, most effective tactics and platform, creates a brand story, and more. Social media is no longer optional in 2018. 86% of businesses are on Facebook and 70% are on Instagram. A growing number of your potential customers are on these platforms, as well as Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Pinterest, and others. Consumers want up-to-the-minute and live content, which they get on social media. Mobile is another must-have. Public relations is about getting publicity. If an editor writes about your company, it provides third-party credibility and improves brand reputation. So, Greg, what tangible benefits do you believe PR can bring to small-cap companies?
Well, I've done a fair amount of research on this, and as I was researching what to focus on in my PR practice, I wanted to find out, first of all, if there has been any research on how PR affects small cap companies, and why these companies don't have, for the most part, public relations help, either in-house or otherwise. What I found first and foremost was that, first of all, most companies do not have public relations help, and that kind of caught my attention, so I did further research to determine if those companies would materially benefit from a PR program. So what I found was that there has been a significant amount of research conducted on the topic, and invariably those studies have concluded that a positive corporate reputation has tangible benefits that in general can be described as enhancing shareholder value for a company. Now, reputation is in itself an intangible asset, and intangible assets make up more than 80% of a company's overall value, according to Forbes magazine. And also, according to Forbes, a survey that they conducted, 3/5 of CEOs surveyed believe that corporate and brand reputation represents more than 40% of the company's market cap. So there's lots of anecdotal evidence to support the case that a good corporate reputation is good for the financial health of the company. But aside from anecdotal evidence, it's also been empirically proven that a good reputation can help increase market capitalization as well as lower the cost of capital, provide a cushion against volatility, and help attract new investors. And I got this data from a number of different sources, including 2016 Reputation Dividend Report, the Strategic Management Journal, the Corporate Reputation Review, Forbes magazine, and a couple of others. So, in essence, these factors should be really near and dear to the hearts of small-cap CEOs because it, first of all, proves that a good PR program is not only a worthwhile investment in and of itself, but could also provide complementary support to their existing IR program. In terms of social media, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add to what you were saying. You mentioned some stats from 2016, and I know, current stats. But today, everything you said is like amplified so much more in 2018. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think particularly in the case for social media, it just continues to grow in importance and influence. So as each year goes by, all of these things that I said become larger. So in terms of social media, as I just mentioned, what social media platforms do you think are best to use for a B2B and a B2C company, and why do you think that?
So for business-to-business companies, the best platforms to use are Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. On Twitter, there are influencers, media prospects, and there are influencers, media, and prospects, and your customers. For example, when you type in hashtag small cap, what comes up is Small Cap Review. This particular site is dedicated to small cap companies, and it has 53.8 million followers. The next one is hashtag Small Cap Network, has 11.4 million followers, and there are so many others. You can follow them on Twitter, build relationships, and grow your network. For both YouTube and videos, they drive huge engagement. YouTube has 1.5 billion users. Its users are only second to Facebook. People watch 1 billion hours per day of videos, and 58% of American adults use YouTube, according to Pew Research. For business-to-business companies, Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest have huge followings. These sites are more visually oriented, so consumers and companies post images of their products, consumers using them, and more. Instagram has 800 million monthly active users and is becoming the platform of choice for users, businesses, and advertisers. Businesses generate more brand engagement with visually oriented products. So if you have a visually oriented product, that's when you would go to Instagram. Although you can also use Instagram. For example, we posted this webinar today on Instagram, but that was a visual part. So, Greg, doesn't the investor relations function handle PR?
In fact, the answer to that simply is no. In most cases, 99% of the time. IR and PR are very different kind of practices. The primary function of investor relations is to enable a company to effectively communicate with investors, shareholders, government organizations, and regulatory bodies, the financial community, and the financial media. This is so that the private and institutional investors can make informed decisions on whether to buy or sell a company's shares. Company's IR department also serves as a bridge for providing market intelligence to internal corporate management and is also responsible for working with the finance team to comply with regulatory obligations. PR, on the other hand, as I kind of defined it before, mainly deals with communicating with a much broader audience, which in this case is the general public, which can include existing and potential customers, communities, and business associates like channel partners and suppliers. So to me, the difference between the two is very stark in that PR exists to create and sustain a certain public perception of a company, while IR's job is to effectively manage the company's interaction with investors and their representatives in the financial media and the professional investment community. Now, of course, there are some similarities between the two in the sense that both have to deal with the media, but the IR function deals almost exclusively with the financial media, whereas the PR function deals with a much broader cross-section of the media, which also includes the vertical trade press.
And finance.
And finance, correct. So in terms of, we discussed the media here in terms of what PR does in terms of their interaction with the media. How is it that you obtain earned media from this media? How do you get editors to write about your company, your product, or your service?
Well, top PR professionals research everything about the industry sector in which they're working. They follow editors on Twitter, read their articles since it's real time, know what they're thinking and writing about, and send press releases that add something of value. Press releases must be newsworthy, educational, relevant, or inspiring. Editors receive thousands of emails per day, so it's important to have a strong headline and show what the product or service offers rather than telling. Releases must contain who, what, where, and when, and include posts and visuals. Just to let you know that actually I had an editor email me to write an article on the landscape of a particular industry, and my client got involved, and in the end, she wrote to me and said, it's too promotional, we can't use it. So, absolutely it's important to, mention the company and what the company does, but anything that's too promotional, they're just going to throw it in the trash. So it's really, what does your company, product, or service offer that's of value to customers or prospects?
I read something actually today about how it's important, particularly if you have a product, to provide kind of product samples to the media you're trying to interested in writing about your story. Do you agree with that, or do you feel that's too promotional?
Wait, I didn't hear. Could you just repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yes, I heard that somebody on, I believe it was on LinkedIn, stressed the importance of providing product samples when you're promoting a product to the PR function. Do you believe that that's important to do, or do you feel that that's too promotional?
Too promotional.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, the editors will ask if they want a sample of the product. Here's an example. I had a client who created cooling shirts that were made for, the police and to be used under Armour in combat. So they made them available to the general public. So one of the targets was, the construction audience and, males in New York City. So the New York Yankees actually wanted to use this and asked if they could have samples of the shirts that the broadcasters could, wear it and then speak about it. So for whatever reason, the company chose not to do that. But it only, so we can never say, okay, well, we can send you the shirts or we can send you an example. It always comes down to the editor or broadcaster asking for it. One other example is an interview that went on with a very large business publication, and the editor kept saying during the interview, which I was listening to, look, can we just have like a sample of how your product works so we can just sort of see on our own, just play around with it and see how it works. So that would be a perfect example of, sending them something. It may not be a product, but maybe exactly how the service is used as opposed to telling them how it's used.
Right, so it's better to have something available than not force it on them.
No, absolutely. They'll ask if they want it, trust me. So doesn't the investor relations, do they handle PR at all?
In most cases, they don't. They can work collaboratively. I think they can work collaboratively, but if you have an IR, if you have an internal IR function and an external PR kind of consultant or firm, you kind of have to set some ground rules in order for them to work well together. First of all, the internal IR team needs to understand that the relationship can be complementary and symbiotic, and that good PR is only going to help their efforts to communicate with shareholders, especially on the retail level. But even on the institutional side, let's not forget that institutional investors are people, they're humans, and therefore they're part of the public as well. So any PR campaign that succeeds in establishing a stellar public reputation will kind of filter down to these people, and that can only help in their perception of the company's value. On the other side, from the PR rep side, the outside PR reps must respect boundaries within the company and within the IR function, and realize that there are regulatory restrictions that public companies have, which may mean that in some cases the IR department will have to sign off on things that the PR folks do to make sure that no disclosure or other compliance issues are being compromised. In essence, it's ironically all about communication between the two communications disciplines, the ground rules of which have to be clearly laid out in advance. So as such, I believe that the IR team should be involved in the onboarding process when external PR help is retained so that everyone has buy-in.
And also with external help, we're also talking about marketing and social media too, because agencies and consulting firms, they do a combination of three, so it's more like multi-channel.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. That's correct.
So I think it might be time to take a poll of our audience.
Okay.
Certainly. Do you understand the differences between PR marketing and social media?
Do we have any answers yet?
Pushing the results now.
Okay, thank you.
50% yes, 17% not really, 33% somewhat.
Okay, well that's good. That's good to hear.
Well, let's try to get those 17% into the 50% crowd.
Right, okay.
All right, so moving on. Since both Wendy, you and I would be considered boutique agencies or sole practitioners, how would you say hiring a boutique agency or a consulting firm differ from using a large firm?
Also, just to clarify, so I have, agency partners, so, people who handle just digital or people who handle website modifications, etc. Well, having worked for 30 years in the marketing communications industry, I've learned that smaller agencies are faster, cheaper, and more agile than large agencies. I actually worked at one of the largest agencies called Burson Marsteller. It's a global agency. So with smaller agencies today, they're void of layers and politics, and small agencies make internal culture a priority, focusing on the client's needs rather than short-term gain. Flexible, collaborative, and responsive were the superlatives of agility bestowed upon the best agencies in the survey of over 100 Gartner clients. Marketers now oversee or heavily influence customer experience, digital commerce, and business innovation. Small and mid-sized agencies can operate in ways that larger agencies, in particular, agencies part of larger holding companies, cannot.
Okay. By the way, just a little piece of news. I don't know if anyone saw it, but Burson Marsteller is now Burson Cohen & Wolf as of yesterday. They just announced that they merged the WPP organization, which owns them, merged them together. So it's now Burson Cohen & Wolf.
Yeah, so now it's even huger.
Right.
Okay, so Greg, what do you think most small cap companies, why do you think most small cap companies don't have a formal public relations program?
Well, it's funny because I just wrote an article about this that was posted on compro.biz, our producers here today. And what I said in that article, which I welcome everyone to go to the compo.biz and read, is that there are probably more than one reason, and obviously more than one reason, why small cap companies and CEOs of those companies in particular don't employ a PR function for the most part. One reason might be their perception of the cost benefit, meaning they don't like the cost and they don't see the benefit. But I think if they take seriously my earlier comments about how a good reputation impacts shareholder value, they realize that it's not a cost so much as it is an investment, just like advertising is an investment, only in most cases less expensive than advertising. Another reason might just be semantics. In some circles, the term public relations has somewhat of a bad connotation or negative connotation, or many CEOs, I think, view public relations, if you're a small cap CEO, as a luxury that's reserved more for larger companies with the time, the team, and the budget to run a PR program. But if they think of it as a means by which to manage a company's reputation, I doubt that many CEOs would argue that they don't want their company to have a good one, or that having a bad one wouldn't be damaging. Another possibility is that companies feel that their IR efforts are adequate to manage a company's external communications and their reputation. But as we described before, there's a significant distinction between IR and PR, and it's really apples and oranges. In the case of small caps, most of the team that deals with IR, which are in many cases CFOs and CEOs of those companies, spend a fairly small amount of time directly engaging with shareholders. So if that's true, then IR is not doing the job in terms of reputation management, nor should it. Finally, it's possible that many CEOs feel that their companies don't have a compelling story to tell beyond financial aspects of their company. But I'd venture to say that every company has unique, distinct characteristics that can be highlighted to build a positive reputation. There's some examples of that, but not necessarily, the only examples are that you can focus on the quality of your management, the quality of your goods and products and services, your corporate social responsibility efforts, your financial soundness, your people management, or even if you have an interesting story about how your company was founded. For me, the purpose today from the PR perspective is to demonstrate that any company that doesn't adequately nurture its reputation does so at its own peril and to its own detriment.
Do you think in terms of I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead. I'm finished.
Do you think that fake news and, all the articles about, Russian bots influencing the election, do you think that that's also affected how PR is perceived perhaps in a negative way?
Yes, I think that's almost inevitable, unfortunately, for the PR profession. There also are, as in any profession, PR professionals that aren't particularly professional. But in terms of the fake news phenomenon, PR people in some cases are viewed in a negative light because they're seen as kind of spin masters and creating, alternative facts, as we've heard before. So, it's important that PR people are, maintain integrity and accuracy in order to kind of fight the reputation that some of the, some of the PR people with less integrity have created. So I think, that definitely plays a part. But, it's really up to the rest of the PR community to, act with integrity and with accuracy in all the news that they're promoting for their clients.
One of the best quotes I've ever heard about this is Richard Edelman, the head of Edelman Agency. He said, we need to be our client's conscience. And I think that's a really, really critical point, that we need to tell our clients the truth about what works and doesn't work, to actually say, this is not going to be picked up for this reason. And that might mean that you lose the client or perhaps the CEO doesn't agree. But, if you're a professional and been in the business for a long time, then, clearly, or it should be that you know what editors want. So it just also comes down to, the CEOs or CMO or the C-suite, doing what they do, which is their expertise, and then, I think listening, but hearing honest feedback and accepting this may not work, let's figure out a different way.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to be able to kind of walk away if you're not able to convince your potential client that they need to be truthful and accurate and act with integrity.
I have one more quick example.
Sure.
So I had a mobile app company that wanted me to help with marketing. So we did a whole bunch of different things like a community outreach and very successful things, but I was having trouble getting earned media. So getting the media to pick this up and write about it directly. So I thought it always comes down to the PR person, meaning we're not doing our job. So I figured, what am I going to do? Like, I can't go back to them and say I can't get earned media. So that was maybe about 9 or 10 years ago. So I taught myself Twitter in one weekend. And then I started, what was interesting is there was something at the UN where they were challenging companies to hire individuals actually with autism. And the company I was representing, they were teaching individuals with autism to learn to code as another campaign. So once I started tweeting about that, we received global social media coverage, which then led to, because social media drives earned media, a story in CNN Tech and a story in CNN Money. So there's, quote, other ways to skin the cow. Like, if it's not going to work, then, there's still other ways, which is why, I'm also speaking about marketing and social media.
Okay. One point is very important is that you need to have a mix of all the different disciplines to have a successful communications program. It's not just PR, it's not just marketing, not just social media. You have to have a kind of a mix of those things in your communications program. I think a lot of people in our audience obviously are within specific industries, Wendy. So would you say that in those cases, should those people be looking at hiring, if they're looking to hire, communications professionals, should they be hiring specialists, or should they be hiring generalists to do their communications?
Actually, to the point that you just mentioned about having, a multi-channel campaign, today generalists are in more demand because they can work across multiple functions. Smaller agencies do equivalent work. After team pitches and obtaining the business, the same people do the work. Agencies become partners, extensions of the brand, and are the voice of the company, or become the voice of the company. So 10 criteria for evaluating smaller agencies are: 1, do they have in-depth knowledge of your industry sector, customers, and market environment? 2, do they challenge underlying assumptions for more creative problem solving? 3, do they have a results-oriented track record? 4, do they have strong testimonials from former and current clients? 5, do they have a culture of team spirit and collaboration? 6, are they original risk takers and open to constructive criticism? 7, is the partnership beneficial to both agency and client? Consider working together for a period of 3 months to find out, or maybe less, or maybe a month. 8, are they knowledgeable about the latest business, marketing, and industry trends? 9, do they know best in practice current B2B or B2C strategies and tactics? 10, can they shift roles and deliverables based on the target audience, not the internal business model? Greg, I think before we go to you, how about if we do another polling question?
Okay. What have we got?
Okay. Do you know how your brand or company is perceived on and offline? Posing now. Okay, and the results are yes from customers, 14, no, 14, not really, 57, yes from our employees, 14.
Wow, 57, Greg, that's a large number. They don't know how they're perceived.
Well, that's going to, we're going to kind of cover that, kind of how you measure the ROI. We're going to cover that next. So I think that's a very salient point right at this stage of the webinar. So we'll get to that in a second.
Okay, so Greg, how would you answer those who say they can't afford outside help, or perhaps they just have too much going on?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, first of all, for small cap companies, which we're really focusing on here today, I think my best advice, although it might sound a little self-serving, is that, really think small. Going with a small shop or a sole practitioner, in most cases, you mentioned this before, they're generally lower in cost. They're more flexible on their fees, and they're more flexible on the structure of their fees, such as whether or not they charge hourly or via retainer. They're more willing to negotiate on that sort of thing. Second of all, as someone hiring a PR professional, be realistic about what can be accomplished within the predefined budget, and don't get project creep, which means, don't keep adding on new aspects to the project or the campaign as you go along, because that just adds cost. I think you have to clearly define the project and the goals and stick with the plan. That's very important. If as part of the campaign you're going to be using outside vendors like a newswire service, for example, I think it's important to ask your PR rep to negotiate directly with those vendors, because very often they're willing to, provide discounts and things like that. So that can help you save some money. If you're on an hourly fee structure, which I would recommend against, make sure that you are concise in your conversations, in your meetings, in your instructions, in your emails, and any communication you might have. The more you drag it out, the more it costs if you're paying by the hour. And then I think lastly, don't overreach on your messaging. Keep your core messaging as simple as possible for two reasons. One is you don't want too many messages out there because it gets diluted. You really just want to have one or two key messages at a time that you're trying to establish in your campaign. And secondly, the more messages you have, the more work that's going to be needed, and the more expensive it's going to be.
Go ahead. Can I just add just one small point? So with messaging, it's really important to not have the same thing. Let's say you use multiple platforms. Let's say you use Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and Instagram. So because those platforms each have different audiences, there's a service called Hootsuite, which automates all your social media, which I completely disagree with, because one, there may be something happening today or tomorrow that's important to your company that you need to speak about on social media. So messaging on Facebook versus Twitter versus LinkedIn versus Instagram, it's all different. So you're right, the same core message has to be the same, but it has to be worded differently based on the audience. Mm-hmm. And one other point, with sticking with the plan, I think it's also important to be agile as an agency or consulting firm, because, and again, that relates, I think, a lot to current events or what's being discussed in the media. So to keep on top of emerging trends, because because it changes so fast that something that was going on last week can be now different this week.
Right. No, I agree with that. Getting back to what we were talking about before in terms of the return on investment of your PR, social media, and marketing campaign, how do you measure return on investment on your work when you work for a client?
So I have a very good example. Last year, I got an earned media article in Forbes, and I was able to do that because the editor was writing about fintech being a disruptor. Is fintech a disruptor? And the client I had was a fintech startup, and he felt that fintech is a disruptor. So we were able to set up an interview where she interviewed the CEO and wrote a 1.5-page story, about his company and him. So the cost of that was $18,000. That is what an ad would cost. If a communications professional obtains earned media, The cost is only hours spent finding and connecting with the editor on LinkedIn or with the media database or Twitter, whatever it might be. Sometimes sending them talking points and collaborating with the client. So, for example, this just, off the top of my head, if it's something rather simple, the estimated cost would be no more than $1,000 as compared to $18,000. For social media, defining your goals is the first step. Are you hoping to increase your number of followers? Are you planning to sell more product? Are you looking for increased traffic to your website? How about foot traffic to your business? You make a record of your existing website analytics, such as visitors, referral links, SEO rankings, etc. Record any current customer satisfaction scores you're tracking, as well as customer ratings on external directories, such as Facebook or Google My Business. Make a note of any KPIs you currently track, that is cost of customer acquisition, advertising budget allocation, average sales per month, etc., to see how these change over time. If you're already setting up some social profiles and have followers, make note of the numbers you already have, the number of connections on LinkedIn, Facebook fans, blog subscribers, and Twitter followers. And don't ever purchase Twitter followers or followers. It should be all organic because, people know when, it's not authentic or saying something on social media like, please share this or please retweet this. If people read something and they feel it's a value, then they will already retweet it or share it or whatever it might be. So you shouldn't really ask people to do that. While social ROI matters, the figures themselves aren't the only indicators of social influence and growth. For instance, influencers, collaborators, and media can all enhance your social media presence without the need for long-term investment. For marketing, it's simply having more content that is credible, audience-centric, used for the right content for the right person at the right time, and differentiation from competitors. And that's understanding who you are and who they are. So you need to know your brand, know your audience or audiences, and develop your own brand story, and also develop and understand your buyer personas. So more sophisticated personalization, better use of predictive analytics, and digging deeper into the data, such as how users interact with your website, what is the most motivating digital content for your buyer segments, when and how are your segments engaging, combined with qualitative insights from customer feedback surveys, talking to your customers. And some more advanced tools like this year would be content personalization using new marketing automation solutions, artificial intelligence, chatbots, and other digital tools. So, Greg, I'm sorry.
Let me just add something. I just want to add something to something you said earlier in that statement, was that in the case of the article kind of equaling $18,000 in an ad placement, there are some people that, and we've discussed this before, there are some people that will also add a multiplier to that because an article has third-party validation, which is much more trusted than an ad. So some people take that $18,000 and will multiply it, use a multiplier of as much as 5 to measure the value of it because of the third-party validation of the content.
That's a really good point, and the fact that you bring that up, it reminds me that once that article was in Forbes, then so many other earned media articles followed, and then, later, actually not later, within 9 months, that client obtained a huge investor because of all the earned media that was out there.
Mm-hmm. So it has lots of tentacles.
Yeah, I think it's time to take another polling question.
Okay.
What influences your buying habits? And the results are in. Recommendations from friends and colleagues, 20%. Local newspapers and trade magazines, 20%. Cost, 60%.
Interesting, Greg. So on that same point, which actually they just, spoke about what influences their buying habits. So what are some strategies you would employ for a small cap company doing a PR campaign? Do you want to do another polling question if it's going to take a few minutes? While we're waiting, I'm going to go into answering another question, which is how do you know who you can trust? PR is relationship driven, so it's important to hire a professional that's familiar with your industry, does media follow-up, and is familiar with what editors want. Most importantly, PR professionals need to set expectations ahead of time. Even though you may think something is news, it may not be. Often that's what gives public relations a bad name. Professionals promising they can get you publicity and then cannot. As such, communication specialists need to be the company's conscience, which is what I just said before, which is Richard Edelman's quote, and be honest with their clients about, what's possible and what isn't. Do we want to have another polling question while we wait for Greg?
Sure, I'll go ahead and push out the next polling question.
Okay.
Do you know the biggest factor to achieving business success? Pushing out the question now. We'll give everyone a couple seconds to answer, and then we'll take a look at the results.
Okay, thank you.
And while we're waiting for Greg to join us again, if anyone from the audience has any questions that they'd like to ask our expert speakers today, please go ahead and click on the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen and type your question into the box.
And Greg is back with us.
Hi, sorry about that. A little technical glitch.
Okay, Greg. So I just answered, just so that we're both on track. I answered the question about how do you know who you can trust.
Oh, okay.
So I think now we'll just go back to what are some strategies you would employ for a small cap company PR campaign?
Okay. I think the first thing that's important is to realistically define what success looks like. You need to know what you're trying to achieve at the end of the process so that you can map out how to get to that point. So that's very important, and be realistic about it. Secondly, I think you have to define your target audiences and the appropriate conduits to reach those audiences, however it is that they consume information. Next, I would say you need to, we touched on this before, research and identify the media who care about and cover your market segment, in this case, small cap companies, and also your industry segment. So it's important for your PR rep or yourself as a company to develop individual relationships with the journalists that cover you. And, keep in mind that for the most part, that's not going to be the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, although that's a great thing to get, and you strive for that. But for the most part, you need to focus on the media that will write about your content, and in many cases, that could be the trade press. But it's very important to focus on the journalists that are covering your type of content. And in terms of content, it's extremely important. This is probably the most important factor, is to create compelling content that effectively delivers your message. It's really all about the story. You can't be ordinary. You can't be run-of-the-mill. You can't be plain vanilla. You have to kind of, have a different story to tell in order to get the attention of a journalist. And then it's also important, as I said before, to combine your paid, earned, shared, and owned media strategies, but all the while understanding that earned media is the most valuable. And lastly, as Wendy kind of pointed out very well, use social media to be responsive, to be proactive, help establish your brand, and to become a thought leader.
Okay, I wanted to answer one of the questions that we received from Roderick. What's the best strategy for marketing random dates? That is marketing off weekends like April 13th to 14th for Vegas hotels. So in terms of marketing off weekends, so, for example, that wouldn't be social media off. For example, if you are at an event, you can be, taking photos and be using them on Twitter or be using them on Facebook. So it's a perfect opportunity to use social media. And often, people think that businesses, customers, prospects, they're not on their computers or phones on the weekends, but they actually are. So that's, I would say, a great opportunity because if people are presuming that, okay, well, we better not do marketing because, we can't do it on this particular weekend, that's like a perfect opportunity, to do it, at least to do social media. So I hope that answered your question, Roderick.
Okay. All right, along those lines, Wendy, what would you say are the top trends this year in 2018 for marketing, PR, and social media?
So B2B marketers, and this is all this year, reported the top factors that have contributed to their success are higher quality, more efficient content creation, strategy development, better content distribution such as targeting. Content marketing has become a number one priority, spending more time on content marketing management and content measuring. The most effective content for both B2B and B2C are social media posts, case studies, videos, ebooks and white papers, infographics, and visuals. B2C also uses interactive tools like quizzes and surveys, newsletters, emails, and print other than magazines. Most effective methods are emails, social media platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn, blogs, in-person events, webinars, and webcasts. B2C use in this order Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and Pinterest. The 5 reasons B2B and B2C state for not having a content marketing strategy are small teams, lack of time, not important, not needed, or other. As compared to B2C, B2Bs are 63% less successful. These statistics are from this year's Content Marketing Institute, Marketing Profs, and Bright Cove. So, Greg, what does PR do that advertising cannot do?
Okay, well, I mean, at first I think it's important to understand what the differences are because they're very different things. Advertising is designed to build exposure for a brand, while PR is designed to build trust for a brand. Advertising placement is paid, and therefore it's guaranteed, while PR placement is earned, so the media, by nature, must be persuaded to cover your story. In advertising, the audience is generally skeptical about the ad and questions its accuracy, while in PR, when you get media coverage, as you said before, that's third-party validation of your message, and that tends to be significantly more trusted. So that's really the most important thing that PR does that advertising doesn't do, is when you get earned media coverage, it provides that validation of an objective third party that provides much more value to the message that's being promoted. Traditionally, advertising has also been a more visual medium, but as Wendy explained before, PR is now, and marketing in social media is now really moving into much more visual tactics, including video. So the advantages of advertising are that you get guaranteed placement and total control of the creative aspect of your placement, which is really the opposite of PR. But the advantages of PR are that it is considerably less expensive than traditional advertising, although not so much in terms of social media advertising. So the ROI is much better versus traditional advertising. And the impact of a placement is much more powerful than an ad placement because it is far more trusted than an ad.
Interesting, I read a statistic in Forbes recently, in the last week or so, and it said that 40% of buyers make purchases due to one social media influencer's tweet. That's huge. That's a really powerful statistic. So also, speaking about advertising versus PR, so, we also have, marketing and social media. So those are other, as you said, less expensive. Of course, there can be, multi-million-dollar campaigns if you're talking about Coke and Pepsi, but, for, small cap companies, you can get make a lot of impact using some of these other strategies. The other thing with advertising, we all know the rule, or Greg, we've all know the rule of you have to kind of repeat the ad. So there has to be you have to show it at least 3 times. Mm-hmm. So if you think about ads that you see on TV, it's not like you just see them one time. Other than maybe at the Super Bowl, but, you have to keep repeating, which is, then becomes really expensive. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think, obviously it adds tremendously to the expense, but it also, I think, most people will question the validity of the claims being made in an ad versus, if they read something in the media, which may be a good thing or a bad thing, but they read something in the media, they tend to trust it a lot more. And that in essence, aside from what you pay your PR person to get that placement, is kind of free placement.
So why don't we take, I think we did a polling question, Greg, when you were offline, but I'm not sure if we showed that or if we're ready for another polling question.
Let's see, what did we do?
Yes, I will read the next one. After listening to the webinar, how likely is it that you'll use marketing, PR, or social media? The results are very likely 60%. I'd like to learn more about each one, 20%. I'd like to use one or more tactics, if affordable, 20%.
So that's great, Greg. Yeah. That's really good. And we still have some time for questions, but I do want to just add here, because it's a perfect time, about learning more. So we have a PDF that you can download, which will go into further discussion about each of the different disciplines, and the webcast will be on demand, so you'll be able to listen to it again. I think before we close, we could open it up. We still have time for a few questions from the audience.
And there are some questions coming in. Oh, sorry.
Yes, no, I saw another question from Roderick. His question is, what are the best practices for convention trade show outreach? It's really great at the trade show, and often they have a hashtag. So that would be what I answered before, that make sure you take pictures, but I'm talking about authentic pictures. It doesn't need to be posed pictures, but take pictures of your booth number, and a short tweet or for Facebook saying please come visit, or we'd love to talk to you about, and then give one specific thing that you would love to talk about. If there's a hashtag, you can use the hashtag throughout the show. Sometimes there's ways to, some trade shows set up ways in which the attendees can interact with others. I would say, trade show outreach first is to walk the show, as much as you can, gather as much literature as you can, talk to people. That's a perfect opportunity in person. So talking to people, connecting with people, and show their interest. It's supposed to be two-way. Everything should be, it's building a community. So if you like something that someone else said, then you can, retweet or share on your social media profiles so that it starts building a community and an audience. So that would be the best practice for convention. And it's real time. So if you're taking pictures and then you're immediately tweeting them or putting them on Facebook or Instagram, then, people are seeing them real time. And then, if there's not a hashtag, then you would put the name of the event. So, and you can do, not hashtag, a pound sign, and then do the name of the event. So then that pulls in others that are at the event so that you can have a conversation.
Yeah, I would also add that, I'm formerly president of Business Wire, so I'm very familiar with the product that they have. Which basically they have a trade show division, as do, I think, the other wire services as well, in which, in many cases, one of the wires is the official wire of those trade shows and those conferences. And in many cases, they have an official kind of news site that, generally speaking, 3 to 4 days, 2 to 3 days before the conference, they are posting news releases about what they're going to be displaying at that conference. So I would encourage you to kind of take advantage of that as well, because that's where the media tend to go to find stories about that event.
Okay. We have another question about how much should a company put aside for marketing, and my answer to that would be, one, there's so many, and this is not to give you a vague answer. It's just, to be honest, I think it depends on the size of your company. It depends on, what it is that you want to do. It depends on where you are in the process, like, how far along are you? If you're ready for PR, because you only have one time to make an impression. So if you're trying to get earned media, you want to make sure that everything is all set. So it's hard to say. I mean, statistics say 15%, but that's, again, what Greg was talking about before. When you're dealing with, smaller agencies, since they understand, then usually, they try to make it, I hate to use a cliche, but a win-win for both the company and the agency or consulting firm, so that it's that it will work for you, Charlie, as opposed to, oh, this is like too much for me to spend. It's more like, well, what do you feel that you can spend, and then what is it we can accomplish with that budget?
And that also goes back to what I said before, is to, be realistic about what you can accomplish within a certain budget. If you say I can only spend X amount, don't expect, to get, twice as much productivity out of that. You have to be realistic about it. But I think in most cases, when you're working on a retainer type of a basis, you're generally going to get more work out of that person, particularly if it's a small shop, than you would get for the same price on an hourly basis.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Charlie, about that, because then it's like you have more of a partnership. If you don't feel that someone's, counting your hours and you have to justify every hour. At least for me, I typically work on a retainer, but to not scare people away with a retainer, I've always been willing to, when people say, well, I don't know you, I haven't met you, could we just, give it a try for 1 month, which I'm always happy to do. And, I try to understand where companies are in the process. If it's a startup company, of which I've represented many, and they just don't have, that much money. They're trying to get VC funding or whatever it might be. So, I've suggested, depending on where they are, if they can only afford $2,000 or $1,500, like I can work within that, budget. And things like doing social media, which, is extremely important, is going to be less costly than spending time, calling the media, trying to follow up with the media and getting articles, in publications. But let me just emphasize again that social media drives earned media. Are we seeing other questions coming in?
It doesn't look like it.
Well, I want to, first of all, thank the audience. Thanks to Greg, number one. Thanks for Compro. Thanks to OnStream for hosting this. Greg, thanks to you. I think it was a really interesting conversation, and I'm glad that people would like to learn more, so they can download the PDF here under materials and actually watch the webcast on demand on compro.biz. I appreciate your participation, and Greg, thank you for having me.
Thank you for participating. I thought it was very worthwhile. I hope our audience got a lot out of it. As you said, we have the follow-up materials. And if you want to follow up with us directly, I believe we're going to put a slide up that gives our contact information.
Yes, please feel free to contact both of us, either of us and both of us at any time. But Greg and I certainly work together as well on different things. So we look forward to hearing from you, and good luck to everyone in our audience.
Thank you. This does conclude today's webinar. We thank you for your participation. You may disconnect your lines at this time, and have a wonderful day.